Welcome to the first episode of Emil Takaev podcast. This podcast is going to focus on a range of topics such as gaming, science, even business. I would love to speak to very different people of different backgrounds and different experiences. I love learning about passions and competencies, masteries of people that they developed over a long period of time, and learn more about that and dig deeper into what they know and explore. My first guest is Austin Yu, who is a former League of Legends pro player, coach, and currently on the game analysis team at Riot Games, also for League of Legends. We had a great conversation discussing League, discussing his experience, and just talking about various things that I would love to ask someone who knows way more than I do about esports, what it was like to be a professional player, to mentor professional players, and now affect the balance of the game, analyze data, make decisions, and ultimately provide a great experience for players or contribute to it. So I hope you enjoyed. I'm looking forward to feedback. Let me know, what do you think about this, and also any ideas for future episodes. Thank you. So tell me more about your life. Tell me more, tell me more. So tell me more about your why. Tell me more, tell me more. Thank you, Austin. Thank you for joining me on my first podcast.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, funny thing, we both work for Riot and we're both housemates, so It makes it incredibly easy. So for starters, I have the very first question, just a general one. I want you to tell me about your overall journey and what got you into pro gaming.
Okay, so I guess in the very start, I was born in China, and I moved from China to Canada at a pretty young age. I think I was 8 years old, around 8 years old. Around that time, my parents, since we're just freshly immigrated, they have to find work pretty much. And I spent all my time, if I was not at school, when I got back from school, I was just playing games, and that occupied most of my time. So that's how I got into games, I guess, in the first place. And then as I played more and more, as I grew older, I think my first interest in competitive gaming was on the Xbox 360. I played a lot of Halo 3, those games, and I actually went to LANs to compete, which was a really cool experience.
For Halo?
For Halo, right. So I try to go pro in Halo 3. But being very realistic, if you win a tournament, you get few $100s, and that does not even cover your travel costs, or it's pretty much just non-sustainable, right? And especially on top of that, I was still in high school and stuff. But that was my first taste into it. Oh wow, there's a whole crowd and people actually care about the game that you play. There's a huge audience, stuff like that. So I thought, wow, this could be very interesting, or at least I was very into it at the time. And then I played a shooter called Halo then, and then online I had a bunch of friends that we eventually kind of migrated to playing games on the computer. And another similar MOBA game I played was Heroes of Newerth, which was it's pretty much a League, but it's just a copy of Dota, which is the father of all the MOBA games, right? Pretty much I played a lot, as you would expect, from high school to college. And eventually, when I got accepted into University of British Columbia. And then where I lived before in Florida, no one was interested in playing League at all. I know in my real life friends, no one had any interest in playing League. But when I moved for college, 95% of the people I was around all love League now, all love to play, and all at that point were even better than me. So it made me very inspired to play more, I guess. And that was kind of the beginning of my League journey, because then I played for the collegiate team. Then I got offers to play in amateur. Then I moved out on my own to Seattle, because that's where the first like team house was for me. And I say house, but it was just like literally the smallest apartment you can ever imagine, and you just cram like 4 or 5 people in there, and like the living situation was not great, but pretty much all of that was driven by passion of like, oh, I want to be the best and play league or try to make it to the top, right? But yeah, that's kind of like a short summary of like how I got into it. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Well, this perfectly segues into my first pro gaming question that I'm curious about is how your family was supportive about it, and were they on board from the start, or you had to convince them?
So the short answer is definitely not. I come from a pretty like strict Asian household, and it's kind of even hard like growing up. If I played games, of course my mom and dad would just get mad, and like they try to restrict my time playing. I guess it's funny if you think about that, because it kind of makes, when there's like resistance there, you kind of want to pursue it even more. But to go on the first point, my parents were not initially supportive, in the sense that they just want me to, finish school, and like, so I went to school for computer science, and they just think like, oh, you did a lot of good stuff. Like I had really good grades in high school and stuff, so they don't want me to like veer off track. But at the same time, I feel like in college I really got the just follow your heart kind of like feeling. So after I did actually commit into like not going to school and trying to make it pro, my parents were supportive, in the sense that they're not going to tell me like, you shouldn't do this, no, like go back, right? But I think it's hard, and I think a lot of pro players do get asked the same question. It's hard, it's pretty rare to find like, especially from your family, immediate support for this, because it's also reasonable, because at the time there was no proof of it ever like being successful or like being a good investment, pretty much, right?
Yeah. Especially early on.
Early on, it's kind of like the Wild West too, for at least for getting paid, or like at least for like, you really don't know what you're gonna be, what to expect in the next even half year. So try explaining that to like strict Asian parents, they just don't want you to dabble in it at all, right? But like I said, as soon as like I started joining teams, and I guess the biggest breakpoint was for me like moving from, I obviously got opportunities to move from amateur to compete in LCS. So like joining a pro league means like obviously more visibility, and they kind of can see like, oh, this is like a working structural system where my son can make money, and like these things are provided for him. So maybe it is not so bad, right? But definitely not the early days, because nothing was ever like concrete. Yeah.
How did you make that move from amateur to professional? And what did you like, being able to compete as professional? LCS was the milestone that you would consider like you made it to pro scene?
So everyone gets their opportunity kind of differently. I would say, so I played in amateur for not too long, and I did get, so there were many good opportunities to move like horizontally between amateur teams. And then I got my first opportunity to play in LCS because, well, actually I tried to switch positions, like roles in game. And I was just playing with one of my friends at the time, like who was on my team, and he was just trying to guide me through, like, I was pretty much learning a new role. And I was learning fast enough to the point where like an LCS team noticed me to like, oh, hey, we'd like to recruit you for just like an opportunity on our team, right?
Yeah.
And at the time I'm like, wow, this is, I don't know how much it'll pay or whatever, but it'll be a big opportunity because it's a top 4 team. So I joined that team, and like through circumstances, the main mid laner for the team got banned. So I ended up filling the role for him. Like we were like maybe like 70% through the season. So my initial like experience on joining LCS was very like turbulent. I kind of got thrown into like a role I wasn't even planning to play. But I'm pretty grateful for it, because like it led to way more opportunities in the future, pretty much. But nowadays, I feel like so there's more structure, but it's also very hard for like a new player to like think of their breakthrough, and mostly they don't have a clear pathway from here I am a collegiate player and I want to go into amateur, and then what do I do after I go to amateur? Like can I go to what is the path to becoming pro? It's not set in stone, but before it was almost like I just play well and you'll get on the team. So but that was maybe a bit more simplistic. Yeah.
I do actually have a question.
Yeah.
It jumps way into the list that I have, but so for that path, is collegiate a good way to become a professional esports player, to get on a team, or do you want to try something else? And you said like there's no set way to become a good player and get hired.
I would say so. In an ideal world, every system should kind of funnel into each other. I think this is like prevalent in like basketball or like just actual like sports that have existed and have like a working collegiate system. And then League is aspiring to be at that level. But it's hard for people currently to manage like, okay, so most collegiate players that are interested in League do play on their collegiate team. But that does not mean that'll lead them to an amateur or pro team. Whereas this system already exists for like the existing sports, right?
Yeah.
So I guess it would be ideal in the future because we would get a lot more like new players and new like talented players. But I think most people at the collegiate level don't take the game that seriously to the point where they want to dedicate all of their time in becoming like very good at their craft. Yeah.
Yeah. There's something about collegiate system that doesn't make sense to me in terms of age. I feel like by that time, if you're really good, you already want to be at the pro level.
Yes. A lot of players like so this year there's quite a few new players in LCS and they're all like under 20, I think. So so you pretty much go from high school to so some of them don't even finish high school, honestly. They go from high school to LCS. Most of them go from high school to amateur, but rarely is it collegiate into amateur into LCS. Right?
Do you happen to know, is there any difference, like how they do that in Korea? Is there a different system?
Yeah, so the main big thoughts in the difference in culture for how they like recruit or find talent in Korea is structurally their solo rank ladder is taken a lot more like serious, and people pick and choose, like they cherry pick who they want out of the ladder more. In America, like the ladder system is not as like I want to say like respected, I guess. People put way less weight over like, oh, this guy is rank 30, maybe we should try him. There is weight, but way less than like when I played in Korea and I thought like, wow, people really like care about their rank so much, whereas it's kind of not the case here. Yeah.
So you can grind in Korea on ladder a lot in solo queue, and if you get high enough in rank, like challenger, or you can get some people will contact you potentially.
Yeah, so there's definitely people just literally just staring at the ladder and like, and it's pretty easy just to spectate games, right? So they can just like right click your name and see like, oh, you're in a game, I'm gonna watch you play. And the people that are responsible for like recruiting talent for each pro team, that's something I'm assuming they'll like. I don't do that obviously, but I'm sure that's like an important part of what they would consider scouting. On top of that, like. It's pretty much like no cost for them to just say like, hey, just come and like play for our team. We'll try you in a few games. If they don't like you, they'll just not spend any more time on you. But if they do think you're like very promising, they'll start to like slowly like put you with their like B team, or like they'll start to like, oh, we have another junior team forming within our org. We'd like you to like be one of the members, right? That's like a very likely scenario. But here, it's almost like The B teams. So the academy system is like the B team system for LCS. It's less like, so there's a lot less talent acquisition. Pretty much there's less movement of players, and there's a lot of players that like would, for example, would play like academy for multiple years, and the turnover rate in Korea is like, at least for, I just see a lot of amateurs come in and out. Korea. So I just think the two systems are like a little different in terms of like development. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you think that contributes to the strength of the region overall? Like they're more looking at the overall pool of players and it's easier to break through just through sheer rank?
So a major thing is there's actually more players in Korea. Even if you think about it, like even though you would think there could be more players in America since it's like a bigger continent, right? But
market.
Yeah, so there's actually multiple, like for example, Chinese players, Taiwanese players, Japanese players. A lot of players queue on the Korean server, and then they all queue at the peak times. So there's actually more volume at the high level for good players, because they also understand the fact that like, oh, this is maybe where I'll get recruited or scouted or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then there's like, I guess to go back on it, people don't view the same way for America. So generally when people get traction for like, oh, let's say people start to watch like my stream on Twitch or something, right? They tend to go down the route of like, oh, I'm going to grow my audience rather than grow like the skill level, and like how fast they grow is less important to their success, I guess. A lot of young players or a lot of players that gain traction, like usually turn to streaming, or they turn to like some way to like monetize rather than going, because playing pro is like, it's very interesting, but I feel like it's a harder path for most people.
Yeah. Speaking of that, during, I guess, your top career moments, how much did you have to train to stay at that level?
So I can give you like a normal rundown, I guess, of like a day for. So when I first joined the league, I played on Team Impulse, and we were, like I said, like maybe. So there's usually 10 weeks in a season. We're about week 7, I would think. So we Monday through Friday were all scrims, and you pretty much wake up 9 to 10, and then you eat some food, and then you play pretty much noon to like, I would say like 6 or 7, and you might have a night block too. So through 12 to 6 is 2 blocks of scrims of 3 games.
Scrims meaning?
Like scrimmage games between 2 teams. So you would schedule them with like the other teams in the league, right?
Yeah.
And then you'll have a dinner break, right? And then after that, you might have another block of games. If you don't, most people just play solo queue on their own time, or they play with their teammates. So that'll go from like, so that's like 7 or 8, and then to like maybe midnight. And then from midnight to like, this is, I guess, where people kind of like branch out, and they might like do something they want to do on their own time from like midnight to 2 before they go to bed, pretty much, right? Or they might just like to like play more. And honestly, when I first joined the league, that's all I did. I just did the scrims, the afternoon block, or the optional. There might be an evening block, and then I would play the game until I was too tired, and like maybe like 2. So that's like, how many hours is that? That's at least like 8 to like 10 hours of playing the game per day, Monday to Friday. And then on the weekends, you kind of take it easier. But I think something that I was gonna do a lot is, if I had a successful game, or like I felt like I played well on the weekend matches, I would take it easy. I'd go for a walk, go on the beach, do something relaxing. But if we lost our games, I would be like upset, like, oh, I need to play more and to like improve and like not have this happen again next week, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
I felt like way more of a crunch. Whether or not that's healthy, that's to be decided. But that's pretty much what I did with my time.
But did that competitive spirit like drive you to enjoy more of that practice, or it could get tedious as a job?
So definitely at the start, it never felt that it was tedious, because all I really wanted is like, oh, I finally made it to the pro level. I want to keep going, right? So never did my like passion get outweighed by like fatigue. I would just want to keep playing, and like even if there were a lot of roadblocks, or even if it was like a really frustrating day, like maybe I lost every game in practice, or maybe something I've been like practicing a lot just is not working. That could definitely happen, but I was pretty undeterred, I would say, in like my first few years of playing pro. And then I think for most pro players, when they've been through like this grind of like wake up, play, eat, play, sleep or gym, whatever, right? They kind of see it more as work, which is kind of like the risk here for most players. They kind of burn out fast because they want to do that. They don't know what else to do, because most pro players, all they do is play the game. But playing the game is no longer super fun for them because it's so ingrained in their daily routine, and like it also affects like their mood, right? If you're winning a lot, you're in a good mood, and if you're losing a lot, you're in a terrible mood. So when it's like that, it can get pretty stressful.
Speaking of that, stress and mindset, since you were a pro gamer for many years, how did you avoid tilting if there was a loss or like a streak of loses? And how do you approach win versus lose or intense situation and not getting angry at mistake of a teammate, say?
I would think so. If you're thinking about like how to maintain a good atmosphere for your team and like pretty much healthy like mental mindset for a season, it's kind of like make sure you're doing the things that help you regulate how you feel every day. Like most people take up like, oh, I need to get exercise to kind of help like my mind be at ease. And that was on a lot of teams, that was like very emphasized for us. So like we would have like a morning routine, or we would go to like a gym like every time we could, or we would go on a hike, stuff like that. That would be pretty common. As for like, how do I myself stop tilting, or like if I'm doing poorly, how do I like refocus? It's a lot like, I feel like for League especially, it's a game of like accepting like the current state of things. So if you're unable to like think about what you're going to do in game, like what is the next step after this action has happened, you're going to have a very hard time like winning the game, because you're not planning anything and the enemy is. And the enemy is like doing one step ahead of you pretty much, right? And that could kind of translate into teams. The teams that struggle a lot generally lack like direction, I would think. People know how to play, but they don't really know how to like combine it into one beautiful like painting on how to like how the game should operate. So what would help me a lot, I would think, is I tend to focus on just, I don't really care what's happening in the game. I'm mostly thinking about like what am I gonna do next? And I think that's like kind of my approach on most things.
Does that how does it work with the 5 people, I guess 4 other people on the team?
That's the hard part, I think, because one, everyone is feeling something different, right? And I would think this is truly one of the things that like separates League as like a competitive game from like other, like for example, like StarCraft. You have to help your teammates, and you have to like I said, how I view the game is you're trying to paint like a painting. And any little action that anyone does will have an effect on your painting. So how do I get like the best looking painting possible? And then the games that like, there's a lot of pro games where you felt like the game went perfectly, like from start to finish. But when you look back on it after the game is over, it could look like a complete wreck. So it's like the teamwork aspect in League and like facilitating your teammates has so many like deep layers of like what you can do to affect and help your teammates, or like there's just so many factors that it's hard to like say what works for every team. Yeah. Something that's pretty cool to think about is a lot of the teams that were like in the world championships that have performed really well or won the whole thing. What happened for them is like, oh, we just naturally click. They don't really have like the recipe, right? For like why they're good. But so I think that's why every year, every team like essentially has a hard scramble on their roster, and they kind of just start from scratch. A lot of teams, I would say like 80% of teams have this mentality, and they're just hopefully like, hopefully we're lucky and we slap together like the right players that will play very well together, right? Yeah.
In terms of people on the teams, how many more people than 5 direct players are recruited per team as like backfills?
So, on the player side, there's usually 5 starters and 5 subs. And I would say this was not always the case. So for example, like the year I joined, we had 2 subs. It was me and someone else, and we were not expected to play. But now, currently in a franchise system, there's 10 starting players and 10 academy players. And every team kind of has like a different goal for their academy roster, but most of the time it's to move them up directly for your team. If there is like a need to, right?
Yeah.
Alongside that, there's a lot of support staff. Most teams have one coach, one head coach, and they have an assistant coach for him, and they have an academy coach. So 3 coaches, and potentially if they have like the like remaining like funds to support it, they might have positional coaches, which is like kind of like a fancy way of saying, hey, this guy plays the same role that this guy on our team could use more knowledge on. We're going to just give him this much money and he'll help us. There's like a big variance in like what they actually do for the player. Like I've heard just like very mixed stories of like how useful they are, I guess. But pretty much if it's in your team's budget, they'll have as many coaches as possible. Yeah.
Interesting. Moving to the topic of the teams and the early League of Legends esports, I read online that Team Impulse had some controversy about paying the players back in 2016, I believe.
Yeah. I can go into that. It's very it's interesting. Most of the information is like available, but at the time, like being someone in that situation, it felt like very strange because 1, I was pretty young, and 2, I really didn't know like, what do I do about this? Oh, I didn't get my money. Oh, I didn't get paid, or I don't know what's happening next year. A lot of these thoughts were like something I haven't like grown up old enough to like know what to do about. So
what happened? They didn't pay the wages?
So pretty much after the first season, I was on Team Impulse. We changed the roster. A lot of the higher paid players moved to different teams. So the team, it was pretty fragmented, but we did need to field a full roster for the next season. And pretty much I substituted for multiple roles on the team at the time. And on top of that, we imported 2 Korean players that did not speak English. So we had a hard time in general.
Yeah.
A lot of things weren't working out for us right away. And on top of that, the owner of the team was not paying us. Like, we were missing a lot of checks. And we were in a house, but 1, there was a lot of things wrong with the house. 2, we didn't really have like, I think our manager was not being paid at the time. And then so we had to like find people to help us like, run the team. All of this pretty much led in the future that Team Impulse needed to be sold to someone else. And I joined the team after that as well. So that was kind of like what I was talking about earlier. That was kind of like the Wild West time for esports, where you were mostly playing because you loved the game and you wanted like the opportunity to go higher.
Yeah.
But one thing was your pay wasn't certain and you didn't really know what was going to happen next. Nowadays, things are like players are a lot more protected. There's like an association for players. There's all the contracts are like a lot more player favored than they were in the past. Players also just get paid more in general. And there's like an established like minimum wage or a minimum salary that they would get paid. All of these things are in place now. But before, you could get scammed very easily, especially on amateur. So the LCS teams, they had to report directly to Riot, right?
Yeah.
So there were like the Team Impulse situation, there were like some very fishy situations, but they do get corrected. But if you are on an amateur team, you can very easily like be scammed out of your pay, be scammed out of your time, be scammed out of like some people really just get baited into moving somewhere, and then the team says they're going to pay for like food and housing, for example, and then they might not they might not hold up their side of the agreement. And then if you think about it at that point, if you're a player, you're probably like 18, 19, 20-year-old kid, and you moved across the country with no like support or money, and then you get screwed over pretty much. That happened pretty commonly, yeah.
So they just used players and they were participating in tournaments, but they weren't paid for it.
And it's mostly tied to why that happened was because, so currently the league is a structured system. There's 10 teams, and those are going to be the 10 teams for the foreseeable future. And they have an academy team that they have amateur teams join, right? Before, we had a relegation system, so teams could get knocked out of the league. And that's like a big reason on why the instability was there, because the incentive for you want to if you're a team in the league, you want to hold your spot because that's valuable, right?
Yeah.
You have something to build off of. But but if you're one of the teams in the bottom, you have to be careful. You have to make sure you have the best players to not get knocked out by another team, right? And then in the same side of the coin, the players in like high amateur that have a chance in knocking out these teams, they see it as a huge like money making operation, right? Because they're like, oh, we can get the spot, we can sell it for a lot of money, and then we can play on the team. So there's a lot of money was being pumped into very short-term contracts because, we only need like the best player for half a year or a year, right? But nowadays, players get signed for like 3 years or 4 years. Anyways, there's a lot of pros and cons in both of these systems, but that was one of the main reasons why the amateur system was kind of like very bad at the bottom, and then I wouldn't even say much better at the top, but there was more. You wanted to play around there. If you're in an amateur team, there's a lot of opportunity for you.
Yeah. Did your family say "told you so" when you had issues with Team Impulse?
No. No, I don't think. I think they're more of along the lines of not "I told you so," but they don't. They hate to see me like in a bad situation, I guess.
So they were supportive on your
side. More supportive, yes.
Good.
Yes.
I'm glad. Since you mentioned the pay and salary, online there's a lot of different numbers thrown. Like some say like it used to be like 75K. Some say now it's up to 300K, in that range. Is it approximately true that you can get like reasonably well paid right now, even by California US standards, in a pro team for say League of Legends?
So my view on that currently, if you're a bottom or near, let's say you're on the floor of pay for LCS, so you've made it past amateur and you're in pro, the base floor is pretty good for you because it comes along with housing, food, and other benefits that, to be honest, most people working like an average job in California,
most
it's
of
way
expensive.
Yeah, it's gonna cover that and then some, as well as there's pay on top of that. So there's a lot of incentive to play even at the floor level in LCS, and especially so to move on that like mid level, it's probably not so different from the bottom, but you get paid more, and there's usually you have a little more job security. You're more maybe you're why they would give you more money is maybe the role that you provide on your team is more valuable. Like they can't find a replacement for you essentially, right? And at the high level, like the very star players, they obviously it's just a bidding war for them, and they do get paid like I don't want to say exorbitant, but it's an amount that's very, very comfortable, and there's been growth and decline of like the top salaries every year, but still it's not like NBA levels, but it's still very like it's very good. You wouldn't imagine making this amount of money playing this game as a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely make enough money. But so on top of that, so currently I would say the players that are in amateur or academy, they're kind of making the minimum to serve. So there's a lot of things I think come with playing in academy. One, you're probably a kid. When I say that, I mean you're like an 18, 19, 20-year-old. I don't think you don't really know how to manage your finances. And two, you kind of don't even know how to like take care of yourself, right?
Yeah.
So this is like a pretty stressful situation for most players like that. Moving to like California, being in a team house or apartment and like dealing with like, there's a lot of players that don't even know how to like do laundry, for example, right? So I would think this opportunity could not, so what you sacrifice, right, is usually like a college education to do this opportunity. I would think currently it's probably not worth it for like an academy player to take this option.
Korea or college?
So no, to take like the option is, should I play on an amateur team or should I go to college? It's close, I think. And I'm weighing it like, if you asked me like, oh, which one would you choose right now at this point, I would probably choose like, oh, I just go to college because I don't think the pay is worth it. And I think the experience is like, it could be not worth it pretty much. But before, I don't think anybody thought this way, even though the pay was even worse, because there was more opportunity to get into the pro league. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of that sacrifice, I'm curious because the misconceptions of pro gaming, because looking from outside, say you have your favorite game, and I even dreamt of doing professional, like say StarCraft 2 pro gaming, which is really hard as well to get into. But what are the misconceptions? Because it looks on paper that if I'm good enough, or I'll get to be better in the future, I can play my favorite game, make money, have very little expenses of the team if I'm on a team, and it covers my housing and food, and I get to be around people who enjoy that game or at least professionally dedicated to it. What are those downsides? Things like you sacrifice college education and maybe time to learn some basic skills. And without sounding preachy, like what do you think those main things are? I meant for me. I don't want to sound preachy about this.
Right. Yeah. I think the main sacrifice, it's kind of like opportunity cost. You sacrifice many years in trying to be elite at your game, which are like kind of non-transferable life skills. Like me playing like 10,000 hours of League does not translate into any other occupation.
What do you mean? Coaching, League of Legends job?
Well, anything non-league. So there's obviously, it's unfortunate that there's like other career paths that could lead to from having this experience. But I would say most people at the time would not envision that at all. They would, a lot like, and so League is like a bigger game, but there's also esport, like games in esports that turn out not as developed or they don't have such a supportive system.
Yeah.
So I think the number one thing is, I put so much time into this game and I am not at the top, right? That means I don't get, I'm not at my goal essentially. I'm not the best, or I'm not making the best money, and I'm not like, so pretty much compare that to what you could get from getting a college education or doing something quote unquote easier, right? I think the opportunity cost is real.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I think a big thing is stress. Most people that do try to go pro and like spend all their time doing it don't make it. They play too much and they stress themselves out, and they don't have good like a good system to like maintain themselves, right? And then what happens? Usually they just stop playing after like a year or something, right? And then it's pretty much, I guess it's like wasted time for them, right? And then another downside, I think, is it is kind of like such a big part of your life. You might not get to experience a lot of things. So easy example is like most players go from end of high school into the pro scene, and then they might exit when they're like anywhere between like 25 to 30, right? So they are actually missing a large amount of like social experience with like college, for example, right?
Well, you can get some social experience in league.
It's a much different social experience. You learn things quickly. You get thrown into stuff, I guess, and it kind of depends like what kind of person you are, like what you get from that. And honestly, so to summarize, I think the real sacrifice is like you have to kind of be sure that it's going to be worth your time.
Yeah.
I definitely know people that like try their best and like played amateur, played all these tournaments, try to get into qualifiers, right? And then they fall one step short, essentially, right? And pretty much it feels like, someone put the carrot in front of them and they're almost there and they almost got the reward. And they almost got their goal of like, playing pro. But being like one step off sounds like a terrible feeling, which is maybe more likely than you would see right away. Yeah.
Yeah. Does the age-old debate versus that talent versus determination in league, do you believe that if someone is determined enough to be a pro player and dedicates enough resources, or say follows the things, you would recommend to become a best pro player they could become, can they make it anyways, or there's some degree of quantifiable talent that you have to have at start?
I think there's a mix between talent, effort, and luck.
Like in anything.
Like in anything. So truthfully, if I were to see someone in their like 18, 19-year-old, they want to go pro in league, and they have like, it looks like they have the skills to support it, I would think they should try, and pretty much they should dip their toes and see if they are able, if that's what they want ultimately, before they throw themselves on like a multi-year journey on like trying to be the best league player they can be. They should just kind of understand what that is going to take. I think playing amateur or collegiate is like a pretty decent like first few steps.
Yeah.
Amateur is kind of, I guess it's kind of harmless in the sense that you're essentially still just playing the game, but in a slightly more organized environment. And your goal is to be the best team you can be, right? So it's kind of like a preview into what pro gaming could be. And if you're especially talented, you might get noticed, and you might have, with some luck, like I said, you might get opportunities to play on pro teams. And really that's all they can wish for, I think. That will be like the most smooth path, right?
Yeah.
And I would think, because I kind of fall into this box where I was like, I don't want to do school. I really want to play pro. I just want to play league so bad with my time, right? So I fell down that path, and I think like it was not so bad of a journey, honestly, in the end, when I like reflect on it.
Yeah.
I think obviously I met a lot of like really cool and unique people. And on top of that, I enjoyed my experience playing pro, and I don't want to like, there's things that I could like change if I could go in the past, but really I don't regret any of it, right? So if I'm looking at it like that, I would recommend people to try to follow wherever like their passion takes them.
Would you say if you're very passionate about league, is the game much more enjoyable and beautiful at the highest level you can get?
It's the intricacies at the highest level for league are definitely beautiful, and they're definitely it's the things that I still care about now, even though I'm not playing. Watching a team play like not a flawless game, but just execute on some things in the game at a very high level and have the opposing team like respond to it perfectly is very beautiful. It's kind of like, I keep going back to it, but it's kind of like the painting a picture thing. Everyone's really trying to paint like their Mona Lisa game. And when it actually does happen at the highest level, for example, at the World Championships, it's really like very, very beautiful for a spectator.
Yeah, which was super hype.
Yeah.
Especially the 2022 one.
Yeah, so that's to go back on that, the 2022 championship was essentially like, hey, we have this team and we're clicking at the right time. Everyone's finally doing their best and we're peaking at just the right time, and we have an actual chance at the championship, which is like very rare to see. Usually there's like a very favorite team and they kind of run through everyone, no contest, right? So the fact that 2022 championships like played out the way it did is very like, it's just like a Cinderella story. That's all it is.
Yeah. Do you think there's like a universal story that in most sports people like the comeback games when you were nearly losing and then you turn the tide, you win by like very thin margin, you barely make it. Is that one of your favorite types of games in general you play, rather than a demolishing easy victory? Sort of, not easy, but where you outclassed your opponent.
It's definitely more fun to play the close games because there's kind of like a factor of neither team is playing perfectly, right? Both teams are making many mistakes, and then contrast that with like one team is like clearly dominant in either strategy or like mechanics, or just they're generally too good for the opposing team. That tends to lead to like, it might make one team seem like, oh, they're untouchable, but they're not as entertaining, I guess, right? So yeah, I prefer like the close matches, the ones where you don't really know who's going to win. At the same time, it's kind of like the opposite thought. When you're playing pro, you want to orchestrate like the perfect game, and you're very proud when, like, for example, like, oh, my teammates knew exactly what I was going to do here, and they played it perfectly, and this situation ended better than I expected. This kind of feeling is like kind of magical in game too, but that's from like a player point of view. Right?
Yeah. Awesome. I want to ask you about your username in the game. It is Gate, and I just always have a hard time choosing a nickname, username in any set game. And what made you choose that, and how did you like it, the sound of it, or what made you make that choice? Okay,
so I think I kind of fall in the bucket of there was like a timeline where all the Korean pros just picked one-word names, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, right? In game, the name Gate was available in like game in the client.
Really?
And one of my friends was like, oh, you should take this name. It's a cool short word, right? I'm like, sure, of course, I'll just take it, right? So I made an account with it. But honestly, at the time, I associated it differently because the main champions I was playing also had that word in their skills. They had two of the champions I played had Gate in their skill name. So when people ask the same question, that's what I told them, rather than like, oh, I'm a Korean fanboy for the short words, you know. But I mean, picking like a name like Gate is not very. I guess I didn't put that much thought into it. Right? It's not something that carries a lot of weight with me because most of the friends I've met through esports or they know me well in the game, they kind of still call me Austin. They call me by my first name, right? Yeah. So it's not something I'm like especially attached to.
So you don't get to hear that every day from people when you play with them, or?
I do, and I'm just very indifferent, I guess, about it. It's nothing like So there's some players that only respond to their name, right? I definitely am not one of them, right?
Yeah.
And even so currently working at Riot, we have two Austins on our team. So a lot of people on my team just call me Gate because
Really?
they actually
Still?
know me. Well, they probably know me more, know of me before I joined the team through esports, right? So it might be pretty natural for them to say that. And it's like an easier way to distinguish two people, right? So
Yeah.
like, and I'm like perfectly okay with that too.
That's very cool. Yeah, that's so cool. You get to choose a name for yourself, and then that carries with you even after you transition to different stage.
Yeah. I guess it is a different stage, but I'm still kind of like, I'm essentially across the street from where I used to be.
Yeah, true.
And it's not so far, I guess.
Yeah. LCS is like here, and then
I still see a lot of the players that I used to play with, and we like ate in the Riot cafeteria and stuff. So it doesn't feel like I'm far. Yeah. And so
yeah. I want to ask you about the career longevity in esports. I know there used to be a stereotype that you have to be young, like early 20s, to maintain high level of reaction skill. And it looks like people are getting older and still are just as good in some other esports. Say like same StarCraft 2.
yeah.
Do you think that is true, or is the age still important like in other sports?
Okay, so I think this is a pretty interesting topic. There's quite a few like ways you can approach it. One thing that is kind of factual and something important to think about when just trying to talk about this topic is League is a game that changes heavily. The cadence of change is very fast. This means like a couple different things. So there's players that have been playing since season 1, right? And they've actually kind of seen like the way things change over time, multiple times, multiple cycles, right?
Yeah.
So they kind of know what to expect. Like, oh, if we raise power in like 80 carries, what will this do to the rest of the characters? Or like they can see kind of like the ripple effect clearer.
Yeah.
At least faster than newer players. For example, like let's say someone started playing last year, they wouldn't really know like this change could mean this change in the future, right? On the same point, since we add so many new things and so many new characters and so many new items and all skills, whatever, it helps to be able to like pick those things up fast, which is what I think new players have over the players that played for a long time.
Even though older players have more experience with overall.
Yeah, so there's like just a very intricate balance here between like how quickly you pick something up versus how well you can recognize a pattern, I guess.
Yeah.
I think obviously the older players, what they have is they're a bit more like, they're harder to shake when it comes to like changing or changes in general. They just have seen it all, and they have an easy way of like, for example, Faker has really been playing for like 8 years pro, I think. And I think it's pretty hard for him to be in a situation where he doesn't know what's going on. Whereas a new player might be like completely shaken in that situation, right? I think the debate for like, oh, can they have just the same reaction speed or like same reflexes? I think that's generally kind of bullshit. like
Doesn't matter.
if I think about my reaction time when I was 20, so now I'm like 28, right? I don't really think it's that much different. Or at least my perception, I guess. I could be wrong. But I think...
But you can get into Challenger if you want.
Yeah,
like,
so...
easily.
I think the main difference for people that have been playing along is they really do get burnt from the game. They're really burnt out. And it takes that much more mental energy for them to like focus on like the same things that they used to be able to focus on easily. That being said, I think there's another thing to think about is the older players, when it comes to, since it's a team game, they actually already know like which moving pieces of the team it takes to like make a team function, whereas newer players really need guidance on this like aspect, right? So I think the most successful teams, honestly, are just a mix.
Yeah.
Where there's like new players open to new ideas, open to like doing a lot of innovative stuff, strategies or like play styles. And they have like a backbone of like kind of a veteran player that is kind of willing to hand them like the guide on how to like proceed.
Yeah.
Generally, that's like, in my head at least, like a working formula in having like a functional team when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah. In terms of, it's always hard to say when is a good time to move on, right? Especially if it's a very lucrative opportunity. And I'm sure people like Faker will keep playing for a very long time since... Do you think he's the best? Actually, I wanted to check with you.
If he's not the best, I don't know who would be, because he's the most recognizable, right? And he's, like I said, he's been through the longevity of his career through many different like. Honestly, we mess around with the game so much that like it's surprising to see someone as dominant as him for that period of time. There's even been periods where people think, oh, he's really not as good as he used to be. And that is met with like resistance, where people would be like, I think he's just as good or if not better than before, right? So the fact that there's even controversy around that and like people are willing to debate these things make him like unrivaled, right? So I think he's, if he's not the best, then he's still the star of the game.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically him being able to stay at this highest level across many iterations of the game and perform and attract this much attention, audience, is a testament to his skill.
Yes. And anyone that like is against that means
a hater.
They're just kind of hating, right? You can't really hate on like facts, I guess. Yeah. Which I think he has too many. He's won world championships too many times. He's proven that like he can play. So as a mid laner, he really has played everything, and like it's hard to imagine him struggling because of like certain champion picks or certain players or anything. He's like very easily able to overcome it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Which goes on into that question that I wanted to ask in the first place: how to transition, and when do you decide that is a time to move on? Since you, as you mentioned, it's most of your conscious effort in the last few years, and maybe years before that, was just focusing on the game. How do you transition to the next step? What makes you transition? And I guess in your case, how did you get into coaching after that?
So I would say, at least, okay, so I'll speak to my own experience, I guess. So after playing pro, and I did not get as many opportunities, so I ended up going towards academy. And there are a lot of opportunities to move in between the two teams, but there was never really like a solid option like that I could see to stay in the league or keep playing at a certain level. So at some point I decided that it's probably like better for me to start thinking about, oh, what am I gonna do after I stop playing league, right? And I'm pretty lucky that league, you can have some diverging career paths, like coaching is one of them. That's kind of like a natural thing for players that have been playing a while to like, oh, I have a lot to give back still, and I want to do that in the way like I want to show newer players what I've learned, essentially, right? This is something I think I kind of dabbled in. I think I'm proficient, but not exceptional at it, and it is also like a craft that I have interest in, but it's I didn't know how to express a lot of like what I learned immediately and provide value, right? So I think coaching is pretty interesting, but not every player that has played the game at the top level will be able to do it well. So I then started looking into other career paths pretty much, and one of my friends, David, he recommended me for Riot and working on the game analysis team. And it's kind of similar to coaching, but mostly applying like a lot of my league knowledge on like a day-to-day basis and like working on like future projects for league, right? And I thought that was pretty interesting right away. So It's pretty interesting what you can do after you're done playing League, and how you like transition out of that is kind of a different pace for everyone. Yeah.
Since you said not all top players are good coaches, but can a, say, not a very top level player become a good coach?
I think that's also an interesting debate. My immediate answer is yes. It's kind of
And
like,
I don't mean you, because you're clearly a top player.
there's a lot of viewpoints on, like, do I need to play the game proficiently in order to observe it at a high level, right? It does not go hand in hand, I guess. It really, to see the game at a high level and like interpret it at a high level kind of just takes repetition. And like, so someone that has just watched film of the game for like 10,000 hours, for example, they definitely don't understand the game at the same level as someone that played 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the person that has played 10,000 hours has a very skewed, like narrow viewpoint, right? So it's a pretty interesting debate. And I think a lot of coaches that are hired, for example, they are former players, but a lot of them, that doesn't mean they were successful in what they're doing, whether in playing or coaching. And there were a lot of coaches that, for instance, they did not play at a high level. They were honestly probably not even like plat or gold in like skill rank, right? But that was not like important of a factor for them to be able to see the game at a high level.
That was at that time, or it's still true?
So I've had coaches that are gold or plat level, but they're not. So that's why I was saying it's they provide a pretty unique viewpoint. And when you kind of like break it down, it's more of just analytically, a game of League is broken down into like options.
Yeah.
And like whatever options your character has is like, it pretty much shifts. You can view the game in a lot of different ways. And I think one of the viewpoints I thought was interesting was that one where they kind of break the game down like minute by minute and like think about, oh, this is what my character can do. But I don't think a normal player thinks that way right away, right? Because they kind of don't see, they wouldn't break the game down like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. I wonder, what would you say if you were able to be your own coach back 5-6 years ago, but you had today's understanding of life, of League, of esports in general?
I probably would. Number one thing is kind of moderation. I was going too crazy on like volume and like playing the game a lot.
Like grinding?
Grinding, yeah. Not to say that's like bad, but there's like a healthy level where like I can have like a good mental state and like I will still be proficient at the game. Pretty much I would balance my life a little better. That's like kind of, I don't want to take that for granted because honestly, I was pretty young when I was playing first and I was just so excited to play, right?
Yeah.
But if I had that kind of guidance, I really think it would have been easier.
Would you listen to it though?
If I knew it was going to help me, yes.
Yeah.
But you know, you kind of have, when you're, so when I joined the league, honestly, it's hard not to just take the wheel and just do whatever you want, right? Yeah. So I think having more guidance would help. Yeah.
Since it's a very competitive environment and you want to be the best, and this is the opportunity that it's hard to get, how do you draw the line between healthy moderation in terms of just sheer volume of practice? And like, is there a set number of hours or like things you want to incorporate into your life other than practice?
So I think it's very important to have physical activity, go to the gym or like pretty much do something every day to improve your body. I really don't think this was super emphasized for, at least players really have like a hard time juggling this, especially the younger you are, right? But I think at least currently a lot of the teams put like a pretty high emphasis on this. So alongside that, so it's hard to know what is too much in terms of play, because how can you really say like, hey, I don't think you should play another 2 hours. Whereas a lot of the players, like the Korean players that are imported here, they will play 2 more hours than you. So you feel almost like pressured. But there's like, you kind of have to know what works for yourself ultimately, right? You can't just copy this guy and like copy his exactly what he does and expect to get the same result, right? Because you're just a different person.
So in overall these years of league, since you started as a professional player or even amateur, how much has the scene changed till now?
It's changed. Okay, so a lot of the faces have come in and out, whether it be players or just players or people involved in the scene. There is this. Okay, so it's a lot more professional now, and the thought initially when I was joining or trying to go pro was like, I'm gonna get a team of the best players I know, and we're gonna make it to the top. Kind of like a childish goal almost, and that is really not like a possible goal anymore. But before there was a lot more innocence, I guess, when it comes to like believing like, oh, you can be the best, or you're able to make a team, and if you guys work hard enough, you could be the best.
Because the things weren't figured out yet?
Yeah, a lot of you like I said, there was like a relegation system, and honestly, if you're an aspiring player, you just try to get your friends or the best the players you meet in solo queue, the best of them, right? And you honestly believe you have a shot in taking down like a professional team, because a professional team really didn't have as much resources as they do today, because a professional team really, well, they get paid a lot. They have minimum 3 coaches. They have analysts that help them. They have like a full facility of like food and like an office space. They have all these things that like an 18-year-old kid now will not have, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is like the biggest change from the scene when I try to go pro versus what it is now, which is like kind of expected because esports has grown a lot since then. At the same time, so that's why I had a hard time imagining like someone aspiring to go pro today. They have a lot more hurdles to jump over than when I did it. Yeah.
So now that you are working officially at Riot for a few years right now?
No, not too long. I think I just barely passed a year.
Just barely passed a year.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the name of the team that you're on is Game
Analysis
Team, which studies and tests different things, which we should be very careful what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Just in general, what is it like to join the company that made if it's fair to say, the main game in your life? And did you feel exhilarated, or was that something that, like you said, like after pro gaming, it was like a big high and it's just something cool to do afterwards, but it doesn't have like, say, the competitive high of winning.
That point you just said is definitely true. The competitive, like, okay, wanting to be the best at something and doing it over and over, that portion of my life is like been suppressed a bit because I'm not playing in pro, right? But at the same time, I've been always, not even with League, I remember my first like few times I was so interested in like game balance and like how the game changes based on changes in the game. Growing up, that was like a big interest for me. So being able to do something similar for the game that I was playing for such a long time definitely like was very high interest for me. As for like day to day, it's completely different, right? I will say the most the thing I'm most like thankful for is my stress level playing in Provers. Here is like a 9 versus like a 2.
Wow.
I am not like losing hair every day trying to do stuff. But I think, yeah, it's just like a big, it's a big change up from what I've been experiencing the last few, or honestly more than few years, like last like 8 years of my life. And I think that's cool because there's, that's how I know like I've kind of closed the chapter on that and I'm doing something different.
Yeah.
And even though it's pretty much directly correlated to it. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, next chapter is very close. Yeah.
It's close.
In the book.
Across the street.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Riot Plus is like, for those who don't know, it's really good at work-life balance.
Yeah, especially if you're a gamer, I think. Yeah, they provide everything, right?
Yeah. So, since League itself is a extremely complicated game in terms of variables and so many A champions, B they themselves have many abilities and how they interact between each other, how can you balance this? Even like how is that possible, and how is it possible to do that on such a frequent cadence compared to other games that do it super rarely?
There's a high level of I guess communication between us and community viewpoint, I guess. If something is super egregious, I think we're very quick to act on it if it doesn't feel right. And as people that play the game, that's something we like lean on, I guess. If this doesn't feel right to play or play against, or feels crazy, or we'll be able to tell intuitively. And if we can't, there's a lot of systems that I'm lucky, like people before me worked on, that are able to inform us like these metrics are off, or like there's a lot of tools available to us pretty much outside of just like playing the game.
Yeah.
And it's I won't say like League is always balanced, especially on new releases. Generally, like we've always been like 1 foot like too far one way or the other pretty much when it comes to balance. But what is good about Riot and how we balance things is it's quickly rectified, or we have like a very big plan on like things we could change to fix it before we even release it.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of planning pretty much.
What would you say like some of the most exciting things you get to do with the balance, or like with helping it, the balance of the team, the game?
I think since I can lean on my many years of pro experience, we often do a lot of things for pro play, whether it be like introducing new champions, or like making like a class of characters more viable, or making like or maybe giving like a mechanic to one character that can change everything. I can lean on like what I've experienced and what would even small things that are tweaked that I would think have a huge impact on pro. These are the things I think I'm particularly good at, or at least have like a strong eye for. And it's cool to see because I worked with a lot of the changes that directly related to last year's Worlds, and it turned out to be one of the most successful ones, right? And it's something I can like be pretty proud of. Like, oh, I contributed to most of like what made the viewing experience so cool, right?
Yeah.
And that's like, oh wow, like, and then actually going there and seeing it for myself made it like feel a lot more real, right?
In San Francisco, the Chase Arena.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh man, I wish I was there, but I wasn't able. I had to cancel my ticket.
Yeah.
But as far as on the balance team, well, I keep calling it balance team, which it isn't. It's game analysis.
So we're essentially, we work adjacent to them, right? The balance team, but we're essentially the playtest team. But it used to be called the playtest team, but we have more things that we provide other than playtesting, right? So that's like, it's like a bulk of our work, I guess.
Yeah. In terms of pro play versus regular casual players, does it ever happen where a change could improve a pro play fairness, say, but it would drastically make an even impact on casual players who don't have that skill set.
I think that happens kind of frequently, actually, where it could be intended or unintended that like we tweak something with a champion and it, for example, it like dramatically reduces the win rate or increases the win rate in like gold or silver or platinum, right? And that is something we've gotten better over the years at, but at the same time, without changing like something drastically, it's hard to just tweak numbers and make everyone happy, right? Which like makes you, there's always like a balanced debate, like do we tune the game for the vast majority of the population, which is like non-pro, right?
Yeah.
Or do we tune it for the majority but have pro play suffer? And like why do we even do these things? Like if we lowered like this champion's pick rate by 20% in pro, but the champion is way worse when it comes to regular play, is that something desirable? There's always a lot of these questions that are like, what do we gain and what do we lose, I guess, right? Which is like, they're all pretty case by case, I would think. There's no Bible, I guess, on like what is correct. Always just the debate.
Yeah. Speaking of that, casual players, I'm extremely terrible at League, but I noticed a sentiment that in general, my colleagues, a lot of them mention that they're very bad at League when they talk about it, and they don't want to play bad and say suck, which I don't agree even, and make a bad experience for someone else. And for me, I think there's like a disconnect between, I think you can enjoy a game without even winning technically. Because I enjoy other competitive games, and even when I lose, and I like having the mindset where I can enjoy a game losing it, even though. And B, I think that kind of mindset makes new players alienated from joining the game, because if you enjoy the process itself, you can enjoy the process of becoming better at it.
That's definitely true, I think, for League. Partially, I would think this is because it's a team game, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. So, well, I think also, so to go back on like the new player experience, so League has tutorials and things that like teach you how to play, and like what is overwhelming for new players is there's so much like knowledge intake right away, especially when you queue against people. Like, so you can play against bots and you can like kind of learn at your own pace, but the moment you get thrown into an actual match where things are happening and people are talking and like you don't know for sure, you don't know what everything does. You like kind of just do things or learn things through like osmosis, pretty much. Things happen around you, and like you don't know if they're good or they're bad, or it's so ambiguous. You kind of need like someone to hold your hand through it, and I don't think that's like super easy for most people to have, like to ask for at least, right? Like, oh, like I'm gonna hold your hand through 1,000 League of Legends games, and like you're gonna be good at it, right? That's a big ask, I guess, right? Whereas like a lot of even competitive games, for instance, like last year I played a lot of Guilty Gear Strive, which is a fighting game, right? And you can play it at a pretty high and technical level. But most of my like growth is literally just playing the game on my own, like fully understanding what is happening by watching the game over and like dissecting it, and then kind of, okay, next game I'm not going to do that. Or I know how these moves work together now, right? There's a lot of self-learning that is directly correlated into winning and like progressing and like getting better, right? Whereas League, it's very ambiguous. You don't really know, other than like sheer champion mastery, like, oh, I know how these skills work better over 10 games, over 100 games, right? Even if that does happen, I get better at this thing. Well, what if I play the second champion out of like 165 or something, right? It's completely like, it's just like a huge daunting task, I think, for new players. And on top of that, there's like teammates criticizing them because they also have like a different viewpoint on like what should happen in the game. Like, hey, why aren't you doing this? Like, what you did here really screwed me over. A lot of these things like really weigh heavily on players. So that's why I think it's hard to attract new players to League. They just feel like they have to learn too much. Yeah.
It certainly feels like a lot of information at once. Like, even though it's a simpler game in terms of some things are removed from, let's say, some other MOBAs, which I liked because when I played Dota, I wasn't a big fan of having a career and like managing that as well. And plus, it had like more extra stuff to learn. But at the same time, it's very tempting to just learn one champion.
Yeah.
And only play that champion or like a couple of champions. And then once you get that comfortable with them, it feels in a way harder to pick up a new one.
Yeah.
And
so
to embrace
ingrained.
the suck, again, of learning from scratch.
Right. So I think League even kind of, if you really like dig deeper into like how League works, it almost advertises itself as like a single player game with people because you're not really when you play the game, you can play as one or two people, right? You can queue as one or two, right?
Yeah.
So you're essentially thrown in with strangers and at most one person, right? And that's like the normal default game mode. You can play with 4 other people, like you can play with your friends, or you can like pretty much, but your rank journey starts with you alone. And like you try to like learn all these things to improve what you do, but you kind of don't even understand the team aspect of it. And that part is not emphasized, even though at the highest level, this is like the most important thing, right? So they kind of do baby you because you kind of just learn how things work without the grand picture. Like you pretty much learn how to do the painting without the frame, right? And it doesn't make sense right away, but after you play for a long time, then you start like, oh, we can like make these things happen as 3 players, 4 players, 5 players, right? You understand the things that are possible, and then you like feel the level up.
Yeah.
But so the level up is very slow, right? And to get like to a satisfying stage where you feel like you're learning, often it just takes too long. And compare it to like a different riot title like Valorant. Valorant is very like, it's the same idea. It's like a team game 5v5, but you can break everything down into like, oh, I should have just shot him better, or like I should have not stood here. It's way easier to process than a League game. League is like, there's just too many variables a lot of the times for like newer players.
And also, like going back to the top-down view, even like strategy view is, to my surprise, sometimes hard to understand that it's a mouse based movement. Versus WASD. And to me, as coming from RTS background, like this is natural and this makes sense. But what would you say like a healthy, casual approach to League thinking of as a new player, not trying to become a pro player, just to enjoy the game? Like
it's hard to, like, if I were to advise someone, pretty much, right? I would think always play with somebody, because someone better than you, of course, right? And it's because you'll learn like exponentially faster. You're essentially downloading what they're telling you, right? Not to say they know everything or whatever, but you can already form like a pretty solid opinion on how the game works just from that. So you'll learn faster. Then when you kind of have mastery over what you're doing, really like every game you play, kind of rewatch it and like kind of understand why you did the things you did. Because if you don't, what a lot of the times happens is you just autopilot through a game, and at the end you're like, oh, I don't really know why I won, or how did I lose, or like you don't get anything from it. And that's something I feel like pro players do at like a high level. They break down everything, especially like why they lost the game, for example, right? And that comes very easily to them. And to someone who just wants to get like, to like an acceptable level of skill, or like pretty good, and like, I can carry my friends, or I can like do these cool things, right? Just be kind of on that improvement mindset, and just be like, don't be too open exactly what people tell you. Just know why they're saying the things they're saying and be able to like parse it pretty much, right? And like kind of download your surroundings. It's harder said than done pretty much, but I think that is like the easiest way for someone to get into the game.
Okay, just find a friend who is really good and better than you. That
they don't have to be really good, but like someone you can learn from pretty much.
There's reading guides. There are so many websites and YouTube channels on.
Yeah, so there's a large amount of information, but this information is not always useful or even correct. There's just, I feel like that's like a common symptom when in the age we're living in, you get overloaded with stuff, but you don't really know why you're even looking at it or like why you're absorbing it or why like these things are happening pretty much, right? And it's kind of up to you. So for example, if you're consuming League content and you read like 20 guides on like how to play your character, right? How do you know what's right? Other than doing it yourself and like seeing what happens and like really like understanding why things are happening, right? So don't read too much. I guess it goes like, it's different for person to person, but definitely sitting there and like only observing is slower than doing it yourself. Yeah.
And it's more fun to participate and play the game than read about the game. Yeah.
But that is the scary part about League. It's almost encouraged to like, please know all these things before you enter, right? And like, that can be a turnoff, I guess, in people that want to like just start a game and play. Yeah.
Yeah. You can enjoy the League without being good. Or like being very knowledgeable. Yeah. And moving to final set, the slightly more general questions. I want to ask you, in terms of your own career, your favorite game or moments and why?
Okay. Most favorite game. There's a few, I guess, that come to mind. There was a game where I was playing on Phoenix One, and we were pretty underdog in terms of like record and score and everything. We were playing as TSM, who was, I think they had one loss, or they were actually, I remember it now. They're undefeated, and a perfect split is
that
18.
Season?
Yes, the perfect. So they're 15-0 or 16-0, and we upset them in a best of 3, which was pretty unexpected. We kind of so pretty much when you're trying to play against a team that you think is better than you, you kind of have to do more. You kind of have to unhinge yourself a bit and like be more willing to take risks. And we played a 3-game series and we ended up winning. And I've never been like the fan line at the outside of the arena has never been longer for our team, which was like very surprising. And I remember it was very euphoric because like I even remember looking at the clouds outside. It's like it was a really weird weather situation and the clouds were like red or something. So it was very memorable because like all these things lined up for us to actually beat them. The most exciting venue or place that I've played at was in Madison Square Garden in New York, mostly because that was the first season I entered pro. And I remember I was obviously super nervous, but the arena was huge and I was just so curious on like how many people were actually there. So I remember I turned around to the ref. I was like, so like how many, we were it was the day before, so we were doing like prep pretty much. I asked the ref like how many people are going to be here. And he said about 1,000 something. I'm like, oh, that's not that bad. Like I kind of don't really know what 1,000 people looks like in front of me, but it doesn't sound that bad. And then I realized later when we were actually playing, he did not mean 1,000. It was 10,000.
Oh,
it was 10,000. So I was. The main thing I felt, I've never felt this before, but when there's sounds in the game, they obviously have like a huge screen to show the audience what's going on, right? And like when there's like big actions taking in the game, like somebody, the bass of the actual sound, I can like feel the stage shaking, right?
Wow.
So it was like very, for one of my first like few experiences playing live and like in front of a crowd, I was kind of like overwhelmed. Yeah.
From the just sensory input.
Yeah, just, well, it just feels like everything, it feels like an earthquake, right? And it's like, it's cool because it means the enemy team is doing something because I can hear my team sound, right? So I'm like, oh, the stage is shaking. They're doing something, like we can anticipate it. But yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. There's a lot of cool pro experiences, I think, that like, for example, that one, right? Where I'm like so excited to just be doing whatever I'm doing. Yeah.
Speaking, actually, you mentioned that nervousness and anxiety. Did you get that a lot? Playing in front of public, and how did you deal with it if you had it?
So I think my first year, yes, because it's just such a new thing for me. I didn't really think I played worse, I guess. It was more, sometimes it could get into my head that like, oh, I need to like prepare myself. I'm going to be doing like such an important action here or something, right? But I think if that's something that actually affects you a lot, like I can't play in front of a crowd or something, right? Then it's going to be hard to be a pro player because that's something you have to do constantly, right? We also had like kind of a weird situation because I was playing pro during the pandemic, and eventually it turned back into we can play in the studio.
Yeah.
It was pretty weird because actually playing outside of the studio, just playing in my bedroom pretty much, right? The actual official matches made me feel like a lot less was at stake because I'm like in my underwear or just like in my shorts or whatever, right? I'm not actually like totally like focused or in the zone when it comes to like playing an official match, which I actually think like a lot of players struggled with. They would much rather have the pressure of like playing in front of a live audience or something, right?
So that pressure does affect performance.
It does, and
in a good way.
It could go either way. I think that's the interesting thing. Some people really need that pressure to even play at their highest level, and sometimes that pressure makes people play a lot worse. But for me, it was mostly I prefer to have or be playing in front of a crowd because I think it made me focus a little harder on like whatever I'm doing.
Yeah, and plus enjoy the game.
Yeah, especially so in Madison Square, I could feel like, okay, if something good happened for us, you could feel the shaking of the cheering, right? So, yeah, it's just such a like a unique feeling. Yeah,
that is awesome.
Yeah.
Next question is, who were your biggest role models in? It could be in life in general. It doesn't have to be league, but if it's league, then.
Yeah, honestly, so going into even like my first few years of playing pro, I didn't really have role models, I guess. There's players that I thought, oh, these players are doing this better than me, I should learn from them. But I kind of didn't like try to like model myself after them, right? There's a few players that I tried to be similar to in terms of like mindset, and one of them was Bjergsen. That for my first year, he's known as like one of the best mid players in North America. But it surprised me initially because as a newer player, I kind of expected to be ignored. But when I was playing against him a lot in the scrim games or on stage, he would actually chat with me a lot and like give me feedback or like tell me stuff that I should know. Whereas like a lot of the other players would kind of ignore me because they don't want to talk to like a newer. It's like low value for them, I guess, right? So yeah, I guess he was one of the quote unquote role models because I tried to like do what he did for other people that were talking to me, or like trying to just like share strategy or like just generally try to help people out pretty much. Yeah.
Without trying to get something in return.
Yeah. Being a little, pretty much, selfless.
Yeah, that is awesome. I forgot, since you mentioned screams, I had a quick question about, has it ever happened when you had a practice against someone and you had a match with them soon, so you had kind of weird mind games.
Okay, so generally this is how things work. We don't play.
Oh, my bad.
Good.
I'm getting a call or something.
Oh,
I don't know. Just these headphones making a noise. Let's just throw them. Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was gonna say something that happens in scrims, or what you would do is you have 2 matches per week, Saturday and Sunday, right?
Yeah.
You will not be practicing against those 2 teams that week. Like the schedule would not, for obvious reasons, right? You don't want to leak your strategy and what you're playing.
Yeah.
But there's nothing you can do sometimes when, for example, in a tournament, there's 4 teams left, and like there's semifinals and then there's finals after. So you have 2 teams that you play against, right? And then when it comes to finals, you played them last week. You kind of already know what they're gonna do, right? So generally, the answer to your question is we just don't interact. But in the case that you do, you might even do like really dumb stuff. Like you might play things that you don't play to make them think that you might play it in the match, which has happened for sure.
That means in the choice of champions?
Yeah, well, usually it comes in the choice of champions. That's where ultimately, that's where the cheese is. If you're trying to cheese someone in the league, you play some matchup where they really don't know what's going to happen because the volume that they have is very low. And I actually, so for like a big part of my career, focused a lot in like when I switched from mid to support role, I had a pretty big champion pool, and a lot of them were just very unconventional stuff where the main power is we pick it early in the pick ban, and they think it's going to somewhere else, and I eventually have it, and we counter pick them in a different role. And that was like a big like Uno reverse card for most teams. Yeah.
Would you be able to predict, like during the pick time, once it's finished, who is going to win like reliably, or that's still not?
There's a lot of variance, I think. So you can be so when you think about stuff like that, you should think in terms of options. Like my character has these options in this part of the game against this character, and that's like a fact. Or based on, there's obviously even more variables than that, but a bad matchup would be like, oh, he did this action. That's nothing I can do. I have to watch, or I have to just accept that happened and play at like minus 200 gold lead, pretty much, right? Those are the bad matchups. Or this champion casted this spell at this range. It's too long of a range for me to counterattack, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of those like situations where specific interactions or specific champion pairings are very favorable. That doesn't ultimately determine like the results of the game, but like a common thing players will do if like they lose terribly in a game is they will blame the coach for pick ban because they just think they had nothing to work with, right?
Yeah, it's kind of similar like in sports.
Yeah.
The game loses, the coach gets the blame.
The coach, generally what I've noticed is the coaches in league, they like to take the blame because that kind of makes the players play better. They like, if they go into a match with the mentality like, if I win, it's because of me, and if we lose, it's the coach's fault. They kind of play a lot more free and like liberated, pretty much, right? But yeah,
because the coach will take.
And yeah, and probably when the coach says that, he doesn't even mean it. It's like if you play bad, you play bad, right? But knowing that, like they won't be upset, or like people just want you to do your best. They play a lot more free.
Yeah. I'm curious, is right now it looks like it certainly is. The league is going to be always with you. Are you like a diehard fan? You intend to keep that big part of your life moving on?
To be fair, it's been kind of going like less and less, I guess, my interest. But with that said, I pretty much still watch it every time it comes on. I just have most of like the care I have for the league is with the people, right? And generally, there's less and less people that I know or care about each year in the league. So I would expect like in like 2 to 3 years, I probably wouldn't know anyone playing in the league, or just like start to be lower and lower, right? And with that, my interest would like slowly go down
because of your group and the circle of people.
Yeah, but I think that's all pretty normal.
Yeah. It's not a factor of the game's performance.
I do care a lot about like League as a game.
Yeah.
But that is not tied to like LCS, for example, right? I like, for example, I would really love like a very interesting World Championship, right? But I would not care if like the LCS did good or bad. I would feel better if they did, like if my league did better internationally, right?
Yeah.
That would be kind of like, oh yeah, we're not as bad as people think. But yeah, I'm not so tied to it though, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would it take for an AA team to win the World?
Okay, maybe it's like kind of unpopular opinion, but I think we're closer than people think. It's bad to say it's gonna be luck, but it will take some luck, because generally, if we change the game in a way that's favorable for teams practicing in an A, in multiple different ways, right? We have a decent chance, less than like 30%, but like I think that's pretty good odds because historically North America has not been great internationally, right?
Yeah.
But to win the whole thing really just takes one team kind of clicking at the right time. It doesn't take like, we're not so far off that we can't be at that level, pretty much, yeah.
Does that also apply to EU?
I think so, yeah. EU has been even closer than an A because in 2020 Worlds, I think, it was Fnatic in the finals, right? So they made it to the finals, which is more than NA can say, yeah.
For now.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah. Nice. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you made in general in the career that you learned the most from?
I think number one thing is being too attached to like, if you have something, for example, to your teammates, I guess, this is kind of like an industry where you really won't play with the same people every 6 months. So it's bad to overvalue some of like your relationships pretty much, to put too much time into them, because you need to be flexible. You need to be able to adapt, I guess.
That sounds very sad.
Does sound sad. Maybe that's a bit harsh to put it like that. I think I was just naive initially to think that like, oh, I like this group of 5, so let's keep playing, right? But things change pretty quickly. Yeah.
So being flexible in terms of open for opportunities to switch teams or for your teammates to change.
Yeah. Just being okay with the possibility that things could change at any point and not be so stuck on like, oh, I need to play with this player to be successful, right? Because that is limiting you essentially, right? Yeah.
But I imagine that overall, like the bonding of winning in a competitive environment in general will make some stronger connections with those people.
Yes, that's true. But it's some people also take that to far of a degree. Ultimately, the most important thing is how you play, and like understanding how to work together and like cooperate is important. But at a very high level, the things that you thought was so special, like how well you work with someone, is kind of commonplace, and it can be like, you don't need years of hardship and like companionship with someone to be able to perform at that level, I guess. And then it's just naive to think that like if you had some success together, right, that this is the only pairing that will work, because who knows, like, oh, if you play with this player, there's a lot of things you could learn instead, right?
Yeah. Do you think it would be possible to notice for you, say we blank Faker's name, but he will play on some lower tier team, but still like a strong LCS level team at least, but say not the, you wouldn't know that it's him. Would you be able to tell that it's an extremely high level player within that team? Could he show that?
Through his own actions, yes. Yeah. And it's ambiguous. So it's like, you might not be able to tell it's Faker, but you would be able to know it's a good player, like based on what he does. And like his just sheerly from like aside from like what he says or how he communicates, like the intangibles pretty much, right?
Yeah.
From just what he does in the game, you could be able to tell he's a high level player. Yeah.
Yeah. So over time, even if he starts from scratch and no one knows him, everyone forgets who Faker is, he could reclaim that relatively quickly in terms of
it's a
climb up.
pretty ambiguous thought, I guess. I would think yes, but it could take a long time or it could take a short time. It's hard to say, like, because if you have a working team environment, because honestly, there's been teams for Faker where the team is not working, but he is playing at a high level. But that makes him look a lot worse. Like
If he's the best on the team and carries it, or
no, like so. To play at a high level on a losing team
Oh, okay.
means that you really have less opportunities to show how good you are, if that makes sense. That's not the case every game, but over a large sample of games, you'll have less opportunities to make those like truly stand out, like game-changing moments, right? Because you're stuck doing like the basic. You're failing the basics with a bad team, right? You're not meeting the really tall hurdles and jumping over them.
Yeah.
You're just tripping at the small ones, right? Yeah.
In teams, is it common in your experience to have a similar level of skill, or it's always like going to be few people better and worse?
So there's definitely a lot of variance in skill, especially in academy, right? Because there's new players and like even the players that are veterans, could be a skill gap between them, right? But usually at the LCS level, people are quick to level up their teammates, I guess. There's more of an emphasis on like, okay, we need to make sure we know how to do these things together.
Yeah.
And then that is the baseline of how we operate, right? And then if you're unable to do that, it's kind of cutthroat where, let's say I really just don't understand this concept of like whatever you're trying to talk about. They'll just get the player that plays my role from academy and they'll bump him up and they'll try to teach him as quickly as possible, right? So especially I would think at the highest level of LCS play, the skill gap is low. But the team gap is wide, and like the things that you do as a team can be drastically different, right? But you kind of all understand the same fundamentals and the same like, this is how we win pretty much, right? And these things work for my team, right? Those are like the basics that people do, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Guess the last question, in terms of what would you do if you could change anything about the gaming or esports for better? What would you do?
It's an interesting question. Do you mean like what I would consider what would be bettering for the esports scene?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a pretty wide question, I guess.
We can narrow it to, say, professional League of Legends scene.
Let me think. I think a lot of esports. So I'm going broader than what we said, but a lot of esports is limited based. Okay, the growth of esports is a bit limited based on how we use it as pretty much like a commercial vessel for a lot of either products or so League kind of like advertises itself through esports, right? But it's grown to the point where it's kind of massive, but they don't really give anything back, if that makes sense. So Faker is like the iconic face for League, right? But in like 10 years, he's not going to get anything from being at that position. Does that make sense? Whereas like someone famous in basketball, they will be able to leverage that way easier. I don't know what I would change exactly, but it seems like esports could be pretty because of a lot of things, I guess. I guess ultimately what I would like is for esports to grow still exponentially and be like kind of commonplace for most people. I still think it's still filling a niche for people that are interested in gaming and like kind of sports. They're like interested in sports and gaming, right? So then they're interested in esports. But it would be cool if it was like everywhere, I guess. You know, every city, every country, that kind of stuff.
Like more widespread.
More widespread and just like, just over time be more widespread. Because I think it will. We are at a cap for it. Yeah.
In terms of like difference between the star power of a basketball player versus a professional.
Yeah, and I think those will like always be there, like star power, right, for basketball or something. And esports won't be able to hit that at the current rate.
But if I push back against that in terms of viewership, esports like League beats already a lot of sports at this time.
Yeah.
Do you think like the quality of the views and numbers are not necessarily directly related because these numbers are not as strong as the numbers of people who actually show up at stadiums or more diehard sports fans in the world? The views are not equal, one football view and one league view.
That's probably true. Like one league view is not the same as one football view, right? But at the same time, just like how accessible is it to like, okay, so league is the number one esport, right? But prior to this, we were having a lot of conversations. Like it's so hard to even just play the game at a beginner level. Whereas like compared to like basketball or something, right? I could just go outside and start playing with my friends, right?
Yeah.
The barrier to entry is like one of the things that is probably stopping the growth a bit. But when it comes to so esports was growing exponentially, I think, and we're at a point where now it's in stadiums and like in like a lot of countries, and we have leagues and stuff, right? But I don't think it'll get any bigger than that.
I mean, are real sports, like real other traditional sports, bigger than that? What is bigger than stadiums and broadcasts? Like maybe TV broadcasts, but TV traditional media doesn't necessarily have the viewership it used to have.
Right. So. Anyways, it's more of just like an abstract idea, I guess. Personally, just feel like growth of esports
has a cap.
Does have a cap. Whereas in the past, maybe I was more naive or more like accepting of like, oh, I think it'll go to the moon, right? But I think because it only fits a certain market for certain people, right? Like gamers, essentially.
Yeah.
Like, for example, my mom is interested in in esports because I was a part of it.
Yeah.
But since I've been not a part of it for a bit, she has not that much interest in it, right? So I don't think it would appeal to as much people as we would think initially.
Yeah.
Maybe like 5 years ago, we were like, oh, this is going to go absolutely crazy, right? And I'm sure that's why so many companies and like people invested into it.
Yeah.
But I would think, I don't know what it would take, I guess, for esports to reach the next level. But I do think we're hitting like the top currently.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think that is also because esports itself changes the games that I watched? Because some games become more popular. And if there was a game that had the longevity of traditional sport, it could attract more people, and maybe the simplicity of that entry-level simplicity.
Yeah, I think that is definitely one thing about it. So in terms of longevity, we would think StarCraft or like League is like up there, right?
Yeah.
And so let's say there's like problems with these titles is why it's not growing as much. It's hard to think of like another game that could like take the spot, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just something to think about, I guess. I wouldn't put all my money into esports, I guess. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I still have many questions, but I think it's a good point to call it for this time. Yeah. If people want to find you, where do you have? You said you had Twitch channel, right?
Yeah,
Do you
I very, very rarely. Yeah, I tried streaming, but not really my focus, I guess.
Okay.
I am on Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
Gate_LOL. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for
Thank you.
coming over to this room.
Yeah.
We'll get the riot fist.
I'll have to make my
That's
way, long journey back.
Yeah. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
So tell me more about your life. Tell me more, tell me more. So tell